And we're starting. Before I start talking about futurism, I wanted to tell you about something that we've already studied. If you guys can see this at home, it's called the Colored Pencil Manual and step-by-step instructions and techniques. And I bought this for my wife and her sister who enjoy crafting and things like that. But what I saw actually pretty early on was this. Want to see, can you guys see this at home? I know there's a glare on it, but look at what they're talking about. The Alba Madonna, Raphael, and another Raphael, Madonna and Child enthroned with saints. And they show all of the various orthogonals. They show you the vanishing points and things like that. Turn on to the next page. Oh, it's right here. Vermeer, woman with the water jug. And they got Fra Angelico, and they have Giovanni Bellini and Caravaggio. Whoa. And Artemisia Gentileschi. So let me open this up so you can see it better. Or can I? Let's see, remove pinch. Okay, we'll just have to go with my little box. But at any rate, why am I showing you all of this stuff? Simple. What this author, in trying to show you, the reader, how to use colored pencils, starts with a lot of the conventions, the rules, if you will, that were established during the Renaissance. And so we still use that today. It's kind of the foundation. And as I've been saying since the beginning of this class, they set down some rules. They developed techniques, and they became conventional. And so we call them, quote, conventions. The conventions of art making, which was synonymous with the conventions of creating illusions. And so it's still there. Now, what has changed? Which reminds me, I only have 4 quiz 4 submissions. Both of you guys here in class have submitted. A bunch of you other guys have not given me an entry. So I'm still waiting. I planned on talking about quiz 4 today, but I don't have them all in. But bottom line is this. Modernism is when all of this stuff changed. When they stopped using these conventions. When they started writing the rule book or rewriting the rule book according to what they wanted to do. I might add on that. We've looked at this for last couple of periods. We saw Van Gogh and his homage to Japanese art. We saw Japanese print that we know artists like Toulouse-Lautrec saw. And I was telling you just on Monday about Picasso and his inspiration, the inspiration he gained from looking at African art. Why? Because they were looking for new ways to express themselves. Period. It was just new. It wasn't traditional art making. And so we had, somebody had written about the Jean Avril Toulouse-Lautrec poster as something that was kind of unusual, something that they didn't understand. I got it in my notes here. Who was that? That was Julia. You were talking about that. Well, the reason that that poster looks the way it does is that there are large areas of black color. It's not modeled, it's not shaded, it's not, doesn't have a direction of the light and shadow, stuff like that. Comes right out of Japanese and Chinese art. So anyway, illusionism is what they did for 450 years, and that, for the most part, is going by the wayside, although every once in a while artists pick it back up and decide to do something with it, and oftentimes something a little different than what we would call the old masters and mistresses had done. That's modernism. So, any questions here? Everybody's talking at me. I can't hear a word they're saying. You said.
I understand.
All right, Mackenzie. I can't hear you.
I understand too.
Talking, Randis. I'm not hearing you guys. I got to figure this out. Okay. Well, futurism. It is like Cubism. It's inspired by Cubism. And we saw what Picasso and some of the others did with taking images and tearing them apart, fracturing them, and putting them back together, not in particularly the order that they had found them. And a lot of this was inspired, as I said, by African art, and was inspired by some of the post-impressionists and so on. A desire for flat canvas, etc. But in Italy, at this time, 1912, Giacomo Balla, Dynamism of a Dog on a Leash. So I think you guys can understand what this means. I didn't get any comments on this as something hard to understand. What is it? Exactly, just the title gives it away. Kaylee.
It's like motion.
It portrays, yes, motion or movement. And that is something that heretofore painting has never really tried to do. Everything was still. Everything we've seen, a snapshot, a moment in time, and And these artists were really interested in movement. And so it's exactly what you guys said. And so you could almost kind of get this on your iPhone. If you can do slow-mo and then speed it up or something, you could catch it. It would look like that. But this was new and it was inspired by Cubism, as you might guess. Little pictures of the dog with the paw, foreleg up here, all the way through the depictions of it back here, the woman with the dress, the feet, all the way here, all the way there, the leash, various positions. Dynamism, that's what futurism was about. And they were kind of an interesting group of artists. They were really kind of the first Italian artists to kind of rise to worldwide prominence for a long time. Actually, Paris had kind of taken the mantle of being the art center of the Western world. Italy comes back, 20th century. And so they were interested in movement, and this is really kind of the same thing. It's a sculpture and it's bronze and it's unique forms of continuity in space. And if you take a look at this, this is a depiction of a person walking. See, kind of going through space. And like Cubism, it's taken the subject and had actually broken it down into various parts and putting them back together. And so this is an attempt of creating movement. Now, let me give you a little political background on this. The Italians were interested in movement, and they wrote numerous manifestos, and that is a lengthy document saying what their art was all about. We are about the future. We are about movement. We are about dynamism. We represent the future of art. Whoa, see, this is where we get this word right out of their own language, right out of their own documents. But it represented a new age too, the new century. And this may seem like kind of boring in this day and age where things change very rapidly. But in 1913, you got people here that are, say, riding on trains from Rome to Paris and getting there on a locomotive, when that represented high-speed transport at the time. And we have some other inventions not coming to full development or fruition yet, but we have the airplanes. People can fly, and they can cross the English Channel, and we can build skyscrapers, we can build monuments and 700 and something feet high, like the Eiffel Tower. This new century, we have horseless carriages. You don't need to have a livery stable anymore. You need a gas station, but you don't need to take care of your horses. It is a whole new world. And that's really the motivation. And that's what they tried to represent in their work, and that is futurism. Gino Severini, armored train, and this was done in 1915 after the outbreak of the First World War. But what you see here is a train which in itself brings to mind power and speed. And it's an armor-plated train, and it's got a cannon on top, and it's got soldiers with rifles. You can see the muzzle flash here. And it's all broken up into various planes, just like the Cubists did. You wouldn't think a turret would actually be this shape. And the barrel of this cannon actually looks to be kind of a little off. But that's not really what it was. It was about this power and movement and dynamism. And in this case, warfare too. Now, in today's world, you would think, well, this is kind of silly. An armored train like this, why wouldn't you just get a tank? Well, tanks really didn't exist yet. But it's the same kind of thought, you know, that it was a super war machine. And here it is, this new century. And in fact, a lot of things happened in World War I that were really tragic because the technology was advancing so rapidly that they did develop tanks. They developed poison gas. They perfected, or at least developed, airplanes to a point where they could drop bombs and shoot people from the sky. So yeah, it was horrendous. And that's what this is. This is about that time. And so that is futurism, and it's kind of got its own place in early 20th century modernism. And another thing develops, another movement develops at this time, and it's called Dada, D-A-D-A. How many of you have heard of Dada? Does it make sense? No. It's not supposed to make sense, so you're right on with that, David. Yeah, it was a nonsensical word, and it was for this art that was really nihilistic. It was really kind of, people have called it the art of the absurd. I just talked about World War I at this time. Some of the early Dada artists were revolting or reacting to the insanity of the First World War. It was a consuming event. It was the first war where armies from all over the globe came together to fight this war. And we also had, as I mentioned, heightened powers of destruction, advanced weaponry. And this all seemed like the world was upside down and going insane. And you can imagine, and you would feel that way. So we got things that were happening routinely now with tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people dying on the battlefield. We got tanks, we got airplanes, we got machine guns, we got poison gas, and we're killing people in unprecedented, on an unprecedented scale. And so I say that. And so Dada itself kind of springs up in a number of different places. One of the early Dada centers was Zurich. Zurich is in Switzerland. You know something about military history, European history. You'll know that during this First World War, and the second for that matter, Switzerland was neutral. It's this country that's in the heart of Europe, pretty much right smack dab in the middle. And it's a mountainous region. It's right there in the Alps. And they are very peaceful people, and they didn't want to side. They didn't want to have anything to do with warfare, period. They maintain that attitude. You'll find Switzerland come up almost as a metaphor for neutrality. And a lot of peace treaties and a lot of other ways to promote peace in the world stem from Switzerland. How many of you ever heard of the Geneva Convention? It's getting talked about some today because of the ongoing war in Ukraine. And they're saying these Russians are bombing apartment buildings. That's a violation of the Geneva Convention. Well, they're right about that. But Switzerland, and because it was neutral and it maintained its attitude of anti-war, a lot of artists flocked there during the First World War. And so they started playing around with a lot of different kinds of things. And I don't have the slides for this. I'll just have to describe it for you. There was a place in Zurich called the Cafe Voltaire. And what they did there was performance art. It's where all the artists hung out and they did performance art, and it was absurd art. It was a lot of things that didn't have a plot, didn't have a script. It was just kind of free form, and it was anti-art. And so around Cafe Voltaire, in the teens, in Switzerland, there are these artists that congregate around there. One of them is this guy, Jan Hans Arp. I'll tell you, this looks kind of weird, doesn't it? That his name has this parentheses in it. Well, he was German. And Germany was one of the instigators of the First World War. And so he changed his name to the French version of Hans, which is John Hans Arp. So he changed his name. That's what that reflects. Collage arranged according to the laws of chance. The laws of chance. What the heck? So I'll tell you how he put this together. He took different colors of paper, gray, white, black. He tore them into little shapes, somewhat like squares, but they're not particularly geometric. He threw them up in the air and they landed on this gray sheet of paper, and he glued them right where they landed. And they are collage arranged according to the laws of chance. That title has changed a little bit. It used to be squares arranged according to the laws of chance, but people pointed out that these are not like really squares. You're right, let's change this. Collage. But at any rate, this is kind of an interesting idea. And it's a whole different way of making art. And it kind of takes the artist's role. It changes the role of the artist in making this. It's not somebody with a lot of skill drawing on a paper like David is right there. The artist is just tearing up paper and throwing it up in the air, and that's it. You glue it down. That's a whole level of anti-art. ADAH. And so this gains some traction, and it gains a lot, and it becomes, in a lot of ways, more of a philosophical kind of art. And you have to think about it philosophically to kind of appreciate what they're doing. Marcel Duchamp, Fountain, 1917. Duchamp was a Frenchman. He worked between Zurich, but he landed in New York City and did a lot of his important work in New York. Fountain, and this is a replica. It's a replica because the original was thrown in the dumpster. Why was it thrown in the dumpster? Duchamp was a proponent of this new ADAH kind of art, anti-art. And so he pulled a urinal that had been used. It was not a new one. Didn't go to Lowe's or Home Depot, got a crusty old urinal, turned it on its side, signed his name. Of course, that's not his real name, it's a pseudonym. But Duchamp will do that from time to time. He'll occupy various personas, which is part of, he's got a long career, but bottom line, that's his signature. There's the date. Submitted it as sculpture. The exhibitors were not amused. They removed it and got rid of it. That's why it's a replica. It's something that hadn't really existed except for in the memory and in the writings of Marcel Duchamp. And you can see this replica was made in 1950. Over 30 years after it had originally been created. By 1950, the ideas of Dada were really gaining traction, and they were seen as being very important to the development of modern art. And for Duchamp, ask about this, Marcel, why did you put this in the sculpture exhibit? It's just a urinal. And he said, well, the role of the artist is to choose objects and designate objects. In fact, so much stuff is being created, he could have been an environmentalist today, but there's so much stuff being created, it's not really necessary for artists to make more things. It's probably more important for artists to choose things and designate them as art. You may or may not agree with that philosophically. As I said, this is a philosophical argument, but that idea gained a lot of traction. And so I saw this a few years back. There was a collector that bought one of these replicas, a collector from South America. And I was thinking he paid like 10 or 12 million dollars for one of these replicas. Anyway, it's a urinal. I want to add a little something to the mix here. The fact that he's turned it sideways and it's off the wall, it doesn't function any longer as a urinal. In order for this to function, it has to be on the wall. It has to have plumbing hooked up to it, water, drain pipe, etc. Once he pulls it off the wall, it's another object. And that was kind of part of the idea. And so one of the other most famous, see these Duchamps, they're mostly in Philadelphia. They had the greatest collection of Duchamp's art, the Philadelphia Museum of Art. But bottom line, LHOOQ. And what he's done here, paper color reproduction of Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa. What this was, in fact, was a postcard of the Mona Lisa. And if you take a close look at it, it's kind of a crummy replica too. And this LHOOQ is meant to, it's meant to say something offensive. But you'd have to know French and you have to say the letters and kind of figure out what this is. And I'm not going to say what the offensive statement is, but I'll tell you how it works. You ever see like vanity license plates? And it'll have a G, the letter G and the number 8, and it'll mean great, or GR rather, and then an 8, great. That's how this is supposed to read. That's an inside joke. Bottom line, though, what he's done with it is put a mustache and a goatee on it. It is a crummy representation, but to be sure, he's defaced this. Again, philosophy. A lot of people have talked about this particular work. And to some extent, for many, it's become a symbol of rejecting the past. I'll put it that way. And all of this stuff that I showed you, Artemisia and Caravaggio and all that stuff, that was art. He is defacing it. That's kind of what modernism on the whole, at least to some minds, was doing. It was a rejection of all of that stuff. And so Duchamp, he has this is called the Bride Stripped Bare by Her Bachelors, even the large glass. And it's really quite a construction. And it's full of all kinds of Freudian references here. The bride stripped bare by her bachelors, even the large glass. And so you have to kind of know Duchamp's artwork and the metaphors, but this image right here, I'll zoom in. This image, that was a chocolate grinder. And you would put cocoa beans on this thing, and this would turn around and it would grind cocoa beans into actually cocoa paste and use that to create chocolate bars. And so this is kind of his metaphor for a machine. And you can see it's all this kind of contraption with the wheels and stuff. These symbols here represent various, those are the bachelors. And they look like chess pieces. And if you knew what life was like back in the 1920s in Europe, you would recognize that one of them would have been a butcher, a postman, a banker. You know, they have little indicators that show what their trade, what their career, what their status was. And this is the bride. And this kind of remained mysterious for a long time. What in the heck is this thing? I wouldn't expect you to know it. What it is an antenna. And this is what an original antenna looked like in the early days of radio. As a matter of fact, you can find depictions of early antennas on places like the Eiffel Tower. And basically what it was something that looked like a screen. And the idea was for the antenna to broadcast and receive radio waves. Of course, they perfected that now. As a matter of fact, you have antennas in your phone that are, extremely sophisticated, that can locate cell towers and or satellites if you want. GPS, hey, I got it. But this is technology of the day, and that's really what this was. And during the making of this, the glass broke. And being like John Arp, ask about, oh, Marcel, why is this, you spent all this time making this thing, why is the glass broken? And he had kind of a laissez-faire answer. Hey, this is okay. I wanted it to break, and it's all part of the piece, and it's good. I'm going with it. Just like Arp went with wherever the torn paper pieces landed, kind of giving up control to that extent. And so, let me see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, who else is here now? Christina, good. Want to give you credit. And so, more Dada, not Duchamp. Duchamp is kind of the major figure in Dada, but the idea catches on. The idea catches on, especially in Germany after the war, and the Germans lost the war, and conditions were just miserable in Germany. The country was broke. The world blamed them for the First World War. They were limited. Their money wasn't worth anything. It was a total disaster. And so this is Hannah Hoch. Cut the kitchen knife Dada through the last Weimar beer belly cultural epic of Germany. Well, that's a mouthful. But what this is really kind of a big political statement about the inept government and the corrupt government, because everything was chaos. There were a lot of corrupt people still making a lot of money while everybody else starved. That happens in these kind of situations quite often. And so this is really a political piece. And if you were living in Germany in 1919, you would recognize some of these people. And it's a photo montage and basically cutting up newspapers and magazines and pasting them on here with some, got some soldiers, got some other people, got machinery, got all this stuff. But throughout this, you see this, Dada, the anti-Dada, Dada. And so this idea of the absurd as art to explain or express your concern with a world that has gone crazy. As I was talking about the First World War and those Zurich Dada artists, this really took off in Weimar Germany. And so you got a lot of artists They're basically political protesters and photo montage actually becomes kind of one of the main media they use. And here's a guy who worked with them. His name's Kurt Schwitters. Now, his work is not quite as obviously political. And he does photo collage, paper collage. And he starts putting this stuff together in a way that's really kind of a formal composition and doesn't really have a great deal of political messages in it, although some of it is, but see, a lot of this, these are forms for to get a visa, there's tickets, there's postage stamps, part of an envelope, stuff like that, little pieces of wallpaper, by the way, patterning, and it's all meant to be like even more abstract and much more formal, much more about the composition, the color, the arrangement, and not quite so much about all of the political messaging. And so this is, I put a star by this because I really like it. This is not ADAH. It's suprematist. And what we have going on in Russia at the time is another nascent movement of modernism. As a matter of fact, in Tsarist Russia, before the Bolsheviks took over in the 1917 October Revolution, actually, St. Petersburg was an intellectual center, and they were very much interested in all of this modernism that was coming out of Western Europe, and especially what was coming out of France. And so they were pushing some of the same ideas and taking some of those ideas forward. Suprematist composition, airplane flying. So what you got here is kind of a painted version, if you will, of Jean Arp's paper shapes or collage, arranged according to the laws of chance. Except these are kind of really very calculated, a little bit more geometric, and they're painted. It's going to be kind of hard to see through this what exactly is the airplane and how is it flying. You don't really see the wings. You see a bunch of geometric shapes. And these suprematists had a different point of view. They wanted to reduce their subjects to basic shapes and flat color. Even if the resulting image, the resulting painting, didn't really look like its source. Thank you. Pollen in spring. But suprematists, that's really what suprematism meant, was this kind of reduction down to basic shapes and forms. So you got Picasso, and he's seeing a lot of this geometric shape and all of this stuff in art from the rest of the world. And you got artists working towards art that does not represent, at least in a photographic way, the subject matter. And so, as I was saying a moment ago, suprematism was was big, and they had, these artists, by the way, were kind of lost to the West for a long time. Partly because the Bolsheviks, the communists, they didn't really like all of this stuff. All of this modern art stuff, black color, patterns, shapes. Architectonic painting. Lyubov Popova, woman artist. That was another thing that they did in Russia at the time too. Women were equally participating in the high echelons of art. And so suprematism, the reduction, the kind of stripping away of those last vestiges of all of that stuff I showed you about in the colored pencil instruction manual. All of that stuff from the past 450 years. And also in sculpture, Nam Gabo, column. This is perspex, wood, metal, and glass. What their painters were doing with these shapes and colors, the sculptors were doing some of that too, but they were kind of interested in a lot of the new materials that were being produced in this modern age, in the modern technology. So perspex, or they had this stuff, you know, like plastics and different kinds of glass and shiny things, all manufactured, all stuff that didn't exist prior to this time. And so sculpture, suprematists. And so as Hannah Hoch made her art as a revolt against the corruption of the Weimar Republic in Germany, this guy here, George Gross, was an anti-war artist as well. And this is pen and paper with a little brushwork in it. Fit for active service. And so what you see here, these are all military people, the fat cats, if you will. And here's the doctor with his German Iron Cross. And here comes this corpse in, and basically what this KV means, fit for active service. So they would send a corpse out to the battlefield, you know, because they were so bloodthirsty, so much into prolonging this war. And so anyway, this is a protest piece, and George Gross continues through the decade. The eclipse of the sun, and again, you see a lot of this stuff. They got board members here around the table, headless, brainless. You got this sword. You got the military guy right here, and the yes man talking into his ear. You got the goat, or you got the donkey with the blinders. You got the corpse, the skeleton, the dead people. And so a lot of this anti-war stuff in its own way. I don't know if you guys watch the news as much as I do, which I'm addicted to news, but they're talking about how Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, is probably not getting the proper or correct information about Ukraine. They're saying he's got all these yes men around him. And that's really the kind of the subject of this piece. This guy's a warmonger. We'll go back to war in a minute. And he's got all of these suits, empty, hollow people. Do it taking care of the business of the war machine and a yes man. So anyway, the more things change, the more they stay the same. Max Beckman. And what comes out of a lot of this, and Gross is kind of considered in this group too. Max Beckman, Night. And you take a look at this, and this is a horrible picture. And it's about torture. See this person here being tied up, getting beaten, very sadistic death. Beckman. One of the best collections of Max Beckman's work, this is an aside, is at the St. Louis Art Museum, of all places. The people that used to run famous bar, the May family, brought Max Beckman over here in the 1950s, and he taught art at Washington University. And they bought a lot of his work, and it's now in St. Louis. But what he's known as, this kind of work, as well as this and that, this becomes known as expressionism. Expressionism, by definition, is the artist expressing emotions, usually outrage or anger or fear, usually. Formal characteristics of expressionism. This is a textbook definition. Line, shape, color, and subject matter are distorted for its emotional impact on the viewer. And that is expressionism. Well, that's a new thing. We're not looking to make pictures that look photographic. We're going to distort everything and give it kind of very unsettling colors and distort the form to create some affect in the viewer. Think about this. We've been talking about post-impressionism and modernism. A lot of this is said to have been inspired by two artists of the late 19th century. First of all, Vincent van Gogh. Vincent van Gogh distorted line, shape, color, subject matter for its emotional impact on the viewer. Think about the Starry Night. See these fireballs in the sky, and you see this clouds and everything whirling and swirling around. That's all distortion, and it's meant to have an impact on the viewer. The second artist, Edvard Munch, the Scream, everything in that piece is distorted. The color is actually quite unsettling. The blues right up against the oranges, the way everything is drawn, it looks like the bay area behind the pier is in some kind of upheaval. You see the two threatening dark figures on the left-hand side of the composition. And you see the shape of the face that's actually seems to be a product of the two hands, one on either side of the face. So that's all distorted in terms of line, color, and subject matter. So that's what Beckman's doing here. Same thing. Otto Dix. George Gross and Otto Dix. Yeah, okay. Another one of those expressionists. Creek, the war. And see, this is like some 10, 12, 13 years after the war. And it's horror. The horrific nature of this war still lives on. And so if you want to see how the First World War affected art, you look to Dada, you can look to Expressionism. A lot of it is right there. And so all of that newfound technology, newly invented technology, designed to kill more efficiently, more quickly. That's really what this is all about. And it has its advocates in sculpture too. War monument. And we have a figure hung, suspended from the ceiling in a ghost-like. It's almost like a spirit. It's nondescript. It doesn't really look like any one particular person. And the clothing is more like a gown or something an angel may wear, but this is a depiction of the spirit, the dead. Ooh, I gotta check. I gotta leave class early. Okay, you bet. That's all right. So that's a big deal. And what happens after all of this? Surrealism. And it kind of happens simultaneously, and it kind of happens in tandem with Dada. And there are a lot of people that were Dada artists who became surrealists, art being one of them. And so De Chirico, Song of Love, another Italian artist, was not a futurist. And if I could characterize it this way, we see artists, painters and sculptors looking for new avenues of expression, new subjects, new things to paint. It was pretty much a rejection of the old. But De Chirico, in his own way, is still using some of those same techniques that were developed in those years from the Renaissance to the mid-19th century. This is kind of a pretty adequate, pretty competent depiction of space and objects, just like you would see in art from 100 years prior. But what he's painting, his subject matter, is not particularly of this world, but he paints these things that actually will evolve to be called dreamscapes. And so you don't really have to give up the idea of painting pictures in this kind of traditional way, as I was telling you with the colored pencil here. You can actually employ that to create images of things that people have never seen. And so they really kind of started looking into this, that I can use, you can't photograph a dream. You got to recreate it. And we have all of the tools to do that because I spent about 400 and some years developing the techniques. And so De Chirico is kind of the godfather of all of this. Song of Love And you can see a lot of this, he's got a rubber glove here, and he's got a ball. All of this is kind of mysterious in how it's put together. And it's meant to be kind of mysterious because it's from a dream. And a lot of times these artists are not entirely using paint. This is oil on wood with wood construction. So this is kind of a two-dimensional, three-dimensional. Two children are threatened by a nightingale. And you see the nightingale here and the children. You see this thing here. We don't know what that is. But it's something out of Max Ernst's dreams, his imagination, actually from some of his deeper thoughts and fears. And so I showed you expressionism, and that comes out of people's fears and sometimes outrage. This is actually kind of coming from the same place. And what we do, how it's been said, and I think it's very appropriate, at this time, artists are starting to look inward for their inspiration. They're not looking outward for things to paint. Oh, I want to paint David here. It's a really good picture. I could see. I'm trying to draw you now. Bottom line is, you don't have to look out, but you look inward, and that's where your subject matter is. And so we got this. This is probably the most noted of all of those dreamscape painters. Salvador Dali, The Persistence of Memory. And I'm sure most of you have seen this before. It's a very, very extremely famous painting. And as you can see, it's at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. I want you to take note of something here too. It's 9.5 inches by 13 inches. So it's really not much bigger than this 8.5 by 11. So it's really kind of tiny. And if you ever get the opportunity to see it, that would be the first thing you notice. Because this thing has been blown up to gigantic proportions on posters and things. But it's a kind of a tiny little painting. And it is out of Salvador Dali's dreams. And he was an accomplished painter too, and he could paint with the best of them in a Renaissance style. In fact, that's basically, he said that many times. He said, learn how to draw and paint like the old masters, and then you can do anything. That's what he does. And so we have these images from the inner workings of his mind. And so we have melted clocks here. Whoa. And a lot of people, I got to tell you, I'm going to go off on a tangent here. I know people who are really deeply into science and math. I know people that are interested in theoretical physics and higher mathematics. They love this guy. And I'll tell you why. And by the way, there is a museum in St. Petersburg, Florida, the Dali Museum. And it has a whole museum full of his work. And a lot of his work fits this description that a lot of the images actually depict theoretical hypotheses in advanced physics and in advanced higher math. So, what am I talking about? We got 3 melted clocks and then a stopwatch here, and it's closed and it's being kind of invaded by all of these ants. There's a fly here, but melted clocks, what the heck, Salvador? Let me tell you. Well, if you take a look at advanced physics of the day, 1931, you'll know that one of the great accomplishments, and it was some almost 20 years before this, but Albert Einstein developed some theories of space and time. And you've all seen that E equals mc squared, the idea that matter holds great amounts of energy, etc. One of Einstein's theory was that time is relative. And he figured this out. This is a very famous story about Einstein. And it comes from, I think, 1911, somewhere anyway. He was on a train. He was looking out the window at the train station, and he saw the clock on the tower of the train station, and it said 9 o'clock. Okay. And he thought about this. What if this train was going at the speed of light? Well, that's how we see things, is from light reflecting off that clock and picked up by the retina in our eyes. So we're seeing that clock minus the speed of light. It's a tiny, tiny billionth of a second, but you're seeing things that have already passed. And he said, if this train were going at the speed of light and I kept my eyes on, I could still see it, it would perpetually look like it was 9 o'clock. Because the light bouncing off of it would be traveling as fast as he was, and he would have this image of 9 o'clock and it would be frozen. So that's where he kind of linked the speed of light. He linked the speed of light to everything. And the common belief in Einstein's theories is that the speed of light is the fastest speed at which anything can travel. But anyway, what does that have to do with this? Well, the idea that our notions of time are melting. Advanced physics is destroying or distorting our notions of what time really is and of space. And this is why my advanced physics people and mathematical people love this guy. If you go to the Dali Museum, if you know somebody that's like got advanced degrees in math, take them with you. I have a niece that has a doctorate in mathematics, and she loves this. And she's like there explaining, well, this one is the hypothesis of blah, 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 you know. And it's amazing. Now, the question is, did Dali know all of that? We think he did, actually. We think that a lot of advanced physics and mathematics inspired him and his work. But others would say that there is something in our dream state when we are asleep and we are dreaming that we tap into another consciousness where all of this knowledge actually exists out there in the universe. And when we are awake and in our conscious state, we're focused on the here, the now, but when we are asleep, we let go of that. And we tap into this universal subconsciousness. Does that make sense? Good. Is that a good place to stop?
Yes, sir.
I think so, because this will lead into some other things. And you guys at home, give me quiz 4 when you can. I'm waiting with bated breath.
All right, I'll try to get it to you.
Oh, Randis, I can't hear you. Can you put it on a chat?
Oh, okay.
Somebody did something to the speakers here. I don't know what it was.
They might have like turned them down.
Yeah, I know. They come, well, they come in. Oh, there's their chat. Okay, I will send it. Good. Good, excellent. Well, yeah, this is really very annoying. Because people are coming in here and they're doing all different. They're bringing their own laptops, they're bringing iPads, they're doing stuff with the volume, with the everything. So, bye. Thanks for letting me vent about the technology too.
You're welcome.
All right. Have a good weekend. All right, see you guys next week.